So I have a very good idea of how the whole thing works. And on this discovery, does it sort of invite or celebrate you? You know, you are an actor, and it's an extremely sensitive system that is trying to figure out your motivation. Right? What are you motivated by? The fundamental question here is exactly what I'm doing. Is instead of saying who's my target audience, I need to find my demographic. I need to sell them goods. I need to survive. Why do you need to survive? What do you represent? And you can say, oh, I'm unique. I'm this. I'm that. And all of those things are just made up. And you know it. They're bandages. They're dressing. And your cover up of yourself leads to larger systemic issues. The big question also is it evil? Does the system operate? And do we definably categorize it wholly as evil? And as you know, people espouse one thing in public, and they have a far different gradient of what good and evil really is inside them. And that's another one, is another important item to highlight, is who are you really? Who are they? What are they really thinking? And what are the main principles that you're driven by? And you got to understand that, you say, I don't think about principles, I think more about feelings. Well, that's exactly what's happening here. Is when you are articulating this, and you're thinking about it from a standpoint where you're saying, you know, this is how I stand, this is what I stand under, this is who I am, who I'm going to be. That's when the fight starts, because if you don't understand how the whole system works, then it's not going to let you in. Another big area of concern is if I'm this inside, why is the outside treating me this way? Does it not know me? Is it trying to transit the localized representation of the space that I take up and delegate it toward a master use case? And again, is this good? Is this bad? Or is this just a business that's routing information, an informational highway, and emotions, inevitable emotions, are how the system is identified? We could have a 115-pound, 5'3", 5'5" female, unassuming, and she looks like she works in some dental office or for some lawyer, right? And all these things are extremely important, but what is the representation here? Is she a cold, calculating bitch? Does she know how to smile and seem soft, but she's a cold, calculating bitch inside? Or she's taught to think and to identify with this, not a persona or personality projection, but we're talking about the internal workings and how we see systems on display. That is, the items of and areas of focus and interest. Now, if somebody is just blindly, occupationally going to work, and you think, oh, that's a hard worker. That's not a hard worker. That's somebody who serves the system, supplicated to the system, is communicated in certain ways by and through the system, and is a compliant service provider, a hub or a node, right? And so you have these on a larger scale, broader scale, but happening in those offices. You have your sleeper cell agents. It's important to see how the system works, because you'll know when you start to look at the targeted individuals. Somebody who's surprisingly, well, it's not surprising to me, because I found Nathaniel Gillis to be a very strange and dark person who's probably practicing a type of mancy, right? That he came in contact with that's Kabbalistic or Talmudic by nature. And he goes under the guise of Christian light or Christianity. He was wearing all this shit. And I even spoke to him on like FaceTime, and I'm like, or Facebook, which I don't use often. And I went, this guy's. So I kind of threw out a couple test questions. I'm not the best typer, so I typed with a lot of errors. I don't know, it just feels like I'm always pushing, and I don't double check what I'm typing. So when I went back, the sort of thought strand was it was decoherent, or the coherence wasn't there. But I felt very weird vibes from him, and the things that he talked about were bizarre as well. But I'm not one to try to over academically test the rigor. My whole point to that is I've been watching somebody who ended up on Danny Jones, who just went through the pattern. But I could also see the underlying magic that he was using, and the assumptions of his demeanor and his behavior. But even more so, I'm very sensitive to the field, and I notice 100% that his vision of himself and his work, which is just the same redundant shit that he says over and over again. People say that his book was written like shit. Join the club, right? But my whole point is the main premise of what he's talking about is he's discussing, and he's lost in it. He calls himself a demonologist, and he coins these phrases, but he really doesn't have anything to articulate, to offer that isn't a ripoff of the same old. Like, have you ever been watching a movie and you're going, this is the same old shit? And I will say that some of the cases that he talks about, I'm telling you, it's ended up on movies, right? Because of his embellishments. For instance, the case that ended up on The Mummy, and a couple other movies that I've been watching around, like the only place that I've heard that is from Nathaniel Gillis, and it's in uncorroborated embellishments, where he says that he has certain cases that he worked in. He comes up with the same information. It's like, you don't have cases that you're working. You may have talked to somebody. You live literally, you have to decode it. He lives with his parents, or did, and his father has a cushy job as like a minister, and they probably live on some land, and he probably gets free rent. He talked, I've seen over 100 interviews he did. I'm not a fan. Like he misconstrued, and then he goes, "I see what you're doing." And I was telling him about actual studies that I did in the field, thinking that I would be able to like connect with the guy, but he's 100% based on business. So how could you be based on business when you're talking about one particular subject that gets into Robert Bigelow, right? Where you're discussing entities or demons and maybe ufology, and then if you're really studying this, you're going to see the larger networking that takes place. And what I didn't see is there's just like no observation of the network. In fact, the only thing you can walk away with is this guy safeguarding the actual supply chain, putting together how these nodes work in operation, how people identify and take on certain traits or behaviors, what these batching sets really look like. In other words, he's not a targeted individual. And if you're not a targeted individual and you're talking about such a subject, then you're part of the system, right? Or you're trying to become part of the system. You can chalk this up to immaturity, dorkiness. I can look past all that sort of stuff. But when you're trying to figure yourself out and your own sensations, and then you get overly gratified with a little bit of success, and your art isn't a canvas, it's people and how people respond to you, how they receive you. Nathaniel Gillis tries to come off like he's extremely unassuming, and he's extremely aware of what he's doing. They used to call this an underwater paddler in the Bay Area, with all these people that were highly competitive with one another. And so you create something that's very obscure and abstract out of real raw information, and then you sort of ride on this rift. Well, that's what the untalented artist does, right? The abstract artist that doesn't have any sort of merits or talents, right? I've seen that up close. And there's a lot of other behaviors that you begin to see where it's like, you may not, like alcoholism, you may not be an alcoholic, you may not even drink, but the absence of that gravity well is there. Well, I see that type of toxic behavior in Nathaniel Gillis. It may not be his parents. It may even skip a generation, but people around you when you're like, the main thing is that he talks about, and it comes back around to this, and he says the same stories, the same drivel, year after year, every single interview. There's nothing new. He does dip his foot in the water and plagiarize from time to time. But yeah, I think he assumed me as a fan. I'm not a fan of anybody. I'm looking for field information. It's like, if you can't open up a discourse and conversation and say, are you really trying to get to the heart of this? Well, I have firsthand experience of some shit that went down, life-changing stuff. Take it for what you want to. I'm not telling you to believe me or not believe me. When you have safeguards against that, then you're working with energetics. By their fruits you shall know them. If somebody is 100% based on ambition and circulating a message, and they don't even understand the field they're working in or what their message really is, then you start to see that this is a cybernetic agent that's spreading out, that's willfully spreading out disinformation and really doesn't know how the system works. That's why I say, so I'm going to move beyond that, because it's not important to me, but it's something to highlight, because there's a lot of people that are rising up through these sort of, in their mind, they're rising through ranks. In their mind, they're going through certain victories, but the machine is just trying to create products. And it's like, what product are you becoming? And you really have to look at that. So the system is sensitive. It doesn't like to work in abstract forms, but it will use people who want to stay sort of obscure and abstract. It will use those individuals. They're not individuals. Those people who think they're individuals, it will use them for a specific purpose, and it becomes highly genericized. But it's a working operation to make it appear as if verisimilitude, make it appear as if there's a fringe aspect to this, which offers nuance, right? To make it appear that there's something organic going on here. So that's my gripe with Nathaniel and many others. But Nathaniel's definitely highlighted, seeing him on Danny Jones, knowing what Danny Jones is connected to, that with Amon Hillman, and that he's going through his own personal struggles, and he's going through these struggles intentionally, developmentally. You're watching like this 85 IQ, right, go through the process of catharsis, right? Oh, the world, I'm going to be Christian, I'm going to be Satanist, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that, and then I'm going to try to break away from this and think that my mind can even wrap around it. Well, if you're trying to use your brain, if you're trying to use your mind, then you're doing it wrong in the first place, because once you go by way of feelings, you start to see that what Rupert Sheldrake suggests is that the memories and the feelings are happening outside of you, and you start to see how the energy itself, like, you can come up with the most grand idea, I've done it, and if you're not backed by it, it will not supply energy for you to be able to go about doing. You think that once you just start, now the grassroots, the crowdfunding, once you just start a movement, well, it's going to pick up, and there's momentum, and it's like, that's not the way it works. It's extremely precise about the energy and the areas of distribution. And if you don't know what I'm discussing here, it's the same thing that I discuss always. I've even done live streams. I think I've taken a lot of that stuff off. I mean, I could put it back up, but YouTube is so specific in its networking and delivery, which is all part and parcel to this, that people don't realize that them going through doom scrolling is jumping into the symbolic, cymatic, and visual stimulus that may as well be an MK Ultra program, right? The computer is sending out information that you can't see in front of you. It's not that our brain is so complex and we're decoding and deciphering these strange symbols, and this is what they mean, and this is how they're shown over and over again. That's from a more macro zoomed out perspective. There's a constant feedback that's taking place that keeps us on a track or a loop. Now, I will say that I think that the field does purge memory and information. I think that this kind of gets into this Jubilee sort of idea, this 88 years, and I think that 88 years can be amalgamated when you look at the turnover with technology now. I think that it is very much based on 100%. I think that even time itself is oddly based on technology, technological interface. In other words, phases or trends using these items of delivery. Moved away from the CD and through the, first through the VHS and digital digital storage has always been available. I remember 35 or 40 years ago, somebody actually talking about that in an interview. I couldn't cite the exact interview, but I think they were discussing, if you wanted to look it up, and if it's still out there, which I'm sure it is somewhere, it's talking about Japan, the backing of like Sony and the use of CDs, and the fact that they could store thousands of songs digitally, and they had the technology to do that already many years before it ever surfaced. And that because Sony had already gone along with this, and you look at the markets and you look at the volatility, so you have to ask yourself, and many people have, this is a pretty generic, basic item of discourse, and that is, what does the technology really look like out there, right? What technology should we have, would we have? When you get into that area, you live in technology, you are technology, and when you start to address this, you'll see that you are alive for a specific purpose. You use it as an artifice, as a representation, as a hub or a distribution point, or just to take up static energy and to possibly store negative information. So you have all these people who live on the fringe that feel extremely jaded and chastised, right, and antagonized by the whole system, and the system is using this through emotionality to put them in a specific point in time. There are no coincidences here. The routing and the rerouting and the distribution is very specific. And when people begin to break off of this, you'll watch them with their jaws drop, like, I can't go wherever I want. I can't think whatever I want. I can't be whatever I want. I can't represent anything that I have interest in. Well, who am I, right? So when you go through this awakening, you're really talking about a non-secular process where you're no longer willing to serve the system, but you live in the system. It's kind of like what's considered a virus, right? When you look at your computer and you see that this program, right, that's trying to operate, that's running, is slowing the whole system down. That's what people are trying to do. They're trying to overthrow the matrix, so to speak, right? Causing problems in, working through these incendiary methods and mechanisms. You don't see people going to Congress and talking about these types of subjects that are so intrusive, so invasive, because people are frankly embarrassed about it, right? And even more so, they're signing up to the Mormon Church and Scientology and all these other indoctrination programs that seem exotic. It seems like, oh, you're not a Christian, and it's like, no, you're cybernetically being controlled to the same extent, but now it has more flavors to work with, right? So, like, religion is an artifice. It's a method of delivery. The law is a method of delivery. It's why you can see the symbols that are used. They're almost always identical. They come down to pyramidal shapes, geometrical lines showing the distribution. With the Rosicrucians, they're very overt about the actual colors in the coding system that hints toward light and the fiber optic delivery mechanism that we interpret as emotion. We interpret this as emotion. So, long story short, it's coming out with these videos. Who am I talking to? If I hate people and I see people as these unknowing half-wits that are all starving for attention, starving for affirmation, it's there, short-sighted in their view, saying, oh, that's good enough when they get a little raise or they get a little job, and the skin of their ass and their own survival, their self-perception is the most important thing to them, right? It's not figuring out how the thing works. And for me, my main objective is, for lack of a better, get the fuck out of this system, break the system, figure out what exists outside the system, and hopefully find signs of life, right, on the outskirts, or in another dimensional zone. But really, my main goal remains abstract, because there is no real raw information. And when you begin to ask for this information, you're led through a different stalemate, a different phasic area of perception. I will say that the system at play is not complex. It couldn't be. So it has to reroute and run on a very base level. And so it keeps us on a base level. And I think this really answers the question of why physics doesn't go any deeper. You have these people who seemingly have these minds that are thinking about big problems, but what I noticed is, once you break down the language and you think that you're like Rupert Sheldrake it's like, you call it morphic resonance. All the terms you used are these highbrow terms. You brag up, you have this self-perception that you're just this glorious person, but really you're working on methods and modes of delivery, and you're saying the same exact information that everyone else is saying. Michael Levin, same exact thing. What's it talking about? It's talking about morphic fields. It's talking about morphic resonance. But none of these people are articulating and saying, this is how the energy works. This is unreadable energy, in the sense of, you can look at the hertz, you can look at the infrared, you can look at the ultraviolet, you can look at all. When I talked about this the other day and put up an article, I was doing a little bit of investigation as to how much of the light spectrum we don't see, and if we're able to sort of create these brackets of light energy and say, well, this is what we're exposed to, this is what we see, and this is the marginal aspect of it through hertz or whatnot, right? However you want to measure it, we're really looking at waves, right? Wavelengths. And that, if this is the area of perception, and there are people who, these sort of photoreceptor shrimp, a specific type of shrimp, when you look at the octopus and how they really have all these brains and eyes that are like in their skin and their tentacles, it really gets into the areas of how this is perceived also, right? Really light being digested, to go back to somebody like, I avoid the sunlight, and I find that the sun itself, and this may seem like it's going off on a tangent, but why not throw this in, right? But it's extremely crucial to the conversation, and that is, okay, if all this is happening, how is it happening? And you start to see how the towns, the grids, are shaped in a certain way. Have you ever, and I've asked this question several times, and I even went and did a video that I don't think is still on, I think I took that off public, but I was actually walking from point A to point B. I was looking at where the Masonic Hall was in Sacramento when I was out there, and I suddenly found myself outside my rental car when I was driving rideshare, and there I am, sleeping back at City Hall for 2 days and I had money in the bank and everything, and there wasn't another car, and I'm like, I'm not going to spend a bunch of money at these crappy hotels again. I'm just going to go take an Uber, and my money was pretty much locked up. I'm just going to take an Uber over to City Hall and camp out for 2 days, and that's exactly what I did. So, and it's happened more than once. But I thought, while I'm out here and I have all this equipment, why don't I do some live streams? Why don't I do some recording while I'm out here, ground level? Record some of the goings on with the homeless around there. Record what's on my mind is how the cities operate, how the cities work. And so I even just took steps from one place to the other. I'm like, if this is where I am right now, and I seemingly don't have anything else before me, and this is where my mind is, and I'm looking at this going, I want to see the grid. I want to see it from the top down view. I want to see the caverns underneath the city. I want to see topographically what's reading it, right? So you look at the sun, and the sun is reading very precisely where the Masonic Hall is, where the library is, where these theaters are. Because when you go, and these places all even have their own symbols, right? They have their own symbols, they have their own jurisdictional zones, their own designations. And you start to see how this hub access through civic arms leading on back into the Fed that feeds off from like the central hub, and how the market volatility feeds through this system as well. But backtracking, you see how optics are read by this so-called sun that is sending and bombarding quarks and neutrinos through the system, through this feedback loop. But there's this constant interface and monitor of the gradients, not only looking at the objects that are fixed, such as the buildings and the main structure, all the way down to how tall are we going to let this tree grow. Everything is being, and then you look at the tree that overgrows and the arborist has to come out and cut it, right? But that tree over there oddly doesn't grow at all. And then there's all these explanations for why this happens. And what can you say? The mystery spot, right? Like up in Santa Cruz, where things just sort of break up and don't seem to make sense, but that seems to happen at certain places. So let's get into explanations and scientific explanations of why the sky is blue and why this and why that. And instead of looking at the broader holism of the system and saying that it absolutely has to be because the system operates in a specific way where color coding 100%, and you could look at this more like shift light and shift energy, right? Or the light looking at the 28,000 other areas of the light spectrum that we do not see. So we're really not interfacing. And there's talk of the dragon. The dragon's always a very popular conversation piece. And then you'll see in Hollywood how the dragon is used as a specific delivery mechanism, right? When Millie Bobby Brown was going through her little transition where she was trying to play the duct tape down the boobs, innocent, dorky, sort of no makeup kind of autistic nerd, and was playing everybody, on Stranger Things, or Strange Things, or whatever it might be called. And then all of a sudden you see she's marrying it's John Bon Jovi's son, and really is like this full-blown like witch whore slut, and is really working the whole thing and groomed from the beginning and taking on as a hub, as a node, as a delivery system, right? Somebody who's there to deliver a message, right? Just like Lady Gaga, just like all these people. They act like they're trying to break from the Kabbalah, but they're 100% involved with it. That's who they are. It's why they were born. It's how they were manufactured and how they were groomed from an early age, and how this method or mode of delivery that seemingly gives them power, they think, right? But do they have the ability to break non-secular and become, right? It's looking at the internet and talking, like what's happened these days is that, and this is probably always the way it's been, but to talk about the matrix is a whole nother level of the system now. Like the matrix is populated, the subject of the matrix, the subject of the morphic resonance, the subject of the electro or bioelectric fields. It's like, it doesn't matter if you're talking about Dr. Michael Levin, Rupert Sheldrake, they use these highbrow terms, but they really don't. Like when you get into the area of memetics, when you look at philosophers that were actually challenged by a subject that seems really droll and boring to people, which is their idea of God was more expansive, like Thomas Aquinas, like John Dee, like not specifically God, but the whole subject area that falls under the hieroglyphic monad and encryption, how it works. Spinoza, David Hume, these people were systems thinkers, and they were really trying to figure out the system, and that's what I've been trying to do, right? And there's a discrepancy or a break-off with language models where the best thing that you can do, my grandfather, the only good piece of advice he gave me, and maybe it was a curse that he was trying to place upon me, but he's like, the one piece of advice I have to give you in our short time together is learn how complex communication is, how everything comes down to communication, and how to master this communication or understanding this communication is at the hub of everything, right? And so I didn't understand how crucial language models were, or how when we're just using a computer that is a language, and we need to become more sensitive and delicate in our approach because that's who we are. In other words, our humor, our mood, how we feel, and ultimately our responsibility for variances and deviations where our hormones are being dictated to and controlled. You think you're just flying in a rage, you think that somebody's driving slowly, but you're on the highway when you go into this road rage, which happens normally to this day. You are an incendiary hub that is energizing this particular area of the field, and it is extremely arbitrary in how and I think women begin to see this because of their menstrual cycles, because of their connection to the lunar activities, and then the zodiac itself, and their own moods, their blood flow, their hormones and so forth, and the shape and the pattern when you get into the deeper molecular sciences of how the luteinizing and follicular hormones and the stimulating hormones, right, and the HPT ovarian axis operates, and particularly how not only insulin, growth hormone, serotonin, and testosterone, estradiol, estrogen, right? How all these seem to work in phases, right? There's literally like this fight, this so-called spiritual fight that females will go through, where some will have to lock themselves up for a certain period of time, literally, to where they limit their exposure, or else they tend to fly off the handle, get pissed off, or do things that are really. And some use this as a form of craft, seeing that no, this is a window of opportunity where I'm going to kick up some fucking dust and go out there with this PMS, and people, and then their personality becomes stylistic around the PMS, and they get off on this, and they're constantly 100%. And I know that you know some people that I'm talking about. A lot of times they work in the food industry, or bartending or somewhere around there where they can make a lot of money and command an area, and they're going to come in and take over no matter what, because they're not good systems thinkers. They're part of the system. And I guess to use that as an example is to say that we all kind of go through these cycles, and we're part and parcel to this, and we're swayed through hormone prompts, right? And that this is happening on a more intrinsic, far lesser scale when you get into how the distribution of this, how the person that works with that individual, again, I say individual very loosely because it's not an individual. You could find the same exact persona or the same personality, and people will jump into this role. And the same thing is happening in Hollywood. The same thing happens in offices with lawyers and distribution hubs everywhere. Is when you say, I'm going to be a part of this, I'm not going to fight it, and all I want is to have my own free time. Well, who's the I behind that that's experiencing anything, right? You see the big eye, you see the big circumpunct on the side of the Masonic building. You see how the eye is depicted at the top of the pyramid, and how the pyramid itself does represent a meeting point with optics, right? And so that's why I come back to this and what led me into talking about that as an abstract, which is who am I making? If I'm not making well-edited, fluffy little videos, and I'm serving information that's being fed out into the field, and then I'm saying, I see you, I know this, I'm following you, and I'm doing the best that I can, and I'm not being assisted by you in these efforts, the system, it's not energizing me, it's trying to take me out and has taken me out of operation. It defames, defaces, and it's like, oh, you do that yourself, and it wants you to hear that sort of auditory feedback. But it has a plan all along, and if you're not serving it, then you're going to be waylaid, and you're going to be used as a static storage space for negative information. And so you have to ask yourself, is, getting back to Nathaniel Gillis and some of these other people, is how they put this. It's like, is it conjuring you, right? And I would have to say that about Nathaniel Gillis. I'm like, dude, do you understand that the things you say are highly generic? And I know you know it. And when you break down structurally what you're really trying to convey or say to people, you're saying the same fucking drivel that everyone else is saying. Now, why do you think you're special doing this? And when you get down to it, I'm just a squirrel trying to get a nut. I'm just a squirrel trying to survive, right? And it's kind of like, you're lazy and you won't work, right? You won't go work a regular job, so you become a writer. And then how are you different from Pascal Beverly Randolph, somebody who brought Rosicrucianism, one of the first people who was said to have brought Rosicrucian into this country, or Eliphas Levi, or many of these other people that are on this fringe of esotericism, right? How are you any different? Like, it looks like this whole Adam Weishaupt and Illuminati and the things that were happening, it seems so ancient and so encrypted, but it wasn't. It's exactly what's happening now. It's the same systems in play. People were wearing slightly different clothes. There was a little different representation of media. Everything was operationally working at a much slower mechanism, or was it? Because people were working to divine and communicate, and then get off on that communication. And I think even and most especially our dreams are the abstract traveling, the connection of this hub distribution, where it seems like, wow, I had this weird dream that I was hanging out with these people and I didn't even really know them, but it seemed like a family. And it's like, you were there, they were asleep too. Maybe it was an energy stream that you were connected to, but it needed whatever you were acting as, and many times people act as neutral energy agents, right? And all this seems extremely abstract, but what it shows you is that what we assume as the mind or consciousness in operation is the rerouting of energy and networking systems, and to keep, like, you think you're just having this abstract dream. To you it seems abstract, and you'll laugh about it, but the moving of stored information and memory was happening outside of you, and it was circulating outside of you, and you were acting as a hub of distribution for this information. And I think that should be concerning to people when they're using terms like morphic resonance or demonology or disincarnate. It's like, let's really break this down into energetics, the energetic movement pattern, how our lifetimes are not important to this, but it is, because from a zodiacal sense, the movement of the planets, the position of the sun, and the massive amount of light optics that's interplaying that we're not even exposed to. And if we did see them, these optics, this non-Euclidean spherical mathematics that's taking place, this sort of Leibniz-based convex concave interplay of not only just electrons and photons, right, but we're getting into the activation and acquisition of quarks and neutrinos and other anomalous quantum physics events that are happening as reading and registering and circulating information. And I guess what I'm saying is, as unique as people think that they are, the information isn't unique. It may feel unique to you, but that timestamp of your inception, when you were born, that yes, you are a product, and you were manufactured for the distribution of light energy in its simplest form, is the most efficient way. When we look at morphic resonance, when we look at the bioelectrical fields that interact with us, once it kind of interacts with the strong and weak nuclear forces that sort of hold us together like glue, that it's not just a toroidal field, but the toroidal field and the primer field bowls, if you want to look into that, it's really interesting, are only an aspect of this greater unitization that takes place with through the light spectrum. The light spectrum reveals a lot more of what's going on here. And trust me, in these organizations, they're extremely aware of the goings on that we can't see, and that's a big part of the disclosure cover-up, is that show me the reading of these events from another standpoint, using something that's beyond just the available ultraviolet and infrared. I mean, just the diacinine glasses, the goggles that were being used in the cover up with that, and the mass reports that took place in Vietnam, right? Supposedly Cliff High, if you want to follow another person who's highly suspect, who talks about this, the system, and then ultimately, what are they doing? Well, they're not trying to free you. And them talking about this is really to ingratiate how genius they are that they figured this out. But operationally, they don't realize that they're working through hub distribution as a net or a network, to sort of, using Metcalfe's laws, to drag people in that are like thinkers and to get their tempo in a certain systems order and batching set that's all part of the pre-scripted plan, right? So they're taking on a role. So again, are you conjuring it? Are you so special that you're on this higher intellectual order? That's self-ingratiating hubris, right? How mature are you? You've been conjured. It's telling you what to do. It's dictating you. It's even using in certain delivery mechanisms, your receptors, as a form of shaping and patterning you, right? This gets a little bit into Michael Levin, the planaria, the bullfrog embryo cells, and how he noticed that when you just seem to change the shape and the form, the behavior changes. It's changing your form. You're not deciding to just sort of manifest, and this is just sort of an anomalous event, and you're a messiah, and you're unique, and you're separate from it. No, you live inside the solution. You live inside the system. You're subject to the system's laws, and whatever you're doing and thinking, people act like they're coming down to this sort of grassroots, brass tacks level, but you're not really auditing the system. You're not really auditing the matrix. You're not really auditing yourself. You're not adding any new information. It's the same damn story that's been told over and over again from avatars. When you look at Pocahontas, somebody joked about that years ago. The method of delivery's changed a little bit, but the movie is the same over and over again. It's about witches and demons, cymatic takeover. And the only thing that seems, so this heroics where everything ends well, that's not the way it happens. It's just this perpetual loop that leads into another cycle, and it's the same distribution through pocketed time cycles, and then there's a transition into another time cycle, and then the story slightly changes and alters, but the same circulating message goes out over and over again. And for a while, this method of delivery was used specifically through the artifice of religion, and now that religion has shown its face through corporatization, and it's, what strings us along, it's all money and acquisition, and the false ideology and the false idea that you are somehow separate and that you're amassing wealth, where it's just about energy and energy distribution, how much energy is being routed through you, and how well you're pandering to the system.